The quiet hum of the night seemed louder than usual, wrapping the house in a cocoon of eerie stillness. I never left the bedroom door open, not even slightly ajar, but that night, for reasons I couldn't explain, it was wide open. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps some subconscious rebellion against the boundaries I'd built around myself. The cool air from the hallway filtered into the room, brushing against my skin. It felt invasive, as though the house itself had decided to intrude on my solitude. In the dim light of the moon spilling through the window, shadows danced on the walls, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. I lay there, motionless, staring at the ceiling, wondering why everything felt so fragile tonight. The air carried a tension I couldn't place, a feeling that something significant was about to happen. As I lay there, my thoughts wandered to the people who filled my life, yet left me feeling so empty. There was my husband, Charles, a man who had once been my sanctuary but had become a stranger over the years. He was always busy, always preoccupied. His love for his work seemed to surpass any affection he had left for me. Our conversations had dwindled to mundane exchanges about bills and schedules. The warmth we once shared was now a distant memory, replaced by a cold, unspoken understanding that our marriage was more obligation than love. And then there was my son, Ethan, my anchor in this storm of loneliness. At 20, he carried a maturity that often caught me off guard. He was kind, attentive, and always there when I needed him. Yet, there was something unspoken between us, an undercurrent of emotions neither of us dared to address. Ethan's eyes held a depth that made me feel seen in a way Charles no longer did. As much as I cherished Ethan's presence, I couldn't shake the guilt that came with relying on him so much. He deserved his own life, his own freedom, but instead, he seemed to spend his days trying to fill the emotional void left by his father. And I let him. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards and the faint rustle of the wind outside. It was a modest home, neither grand nor humble, but it held an air of melancholy. The living room was dimly lit by a single lamp we always forgot to turn off, casting a soft, amber glow on the worn-out furniture. The kitchen, just visible from my room, stood in perfect order, a stark contrast to the chaos in my heart. My bedroom was my refuge, though it no longer felt like one. The bed, large and cold, seemed to mock me with its emptiness. Charles had been sleeping in the guest room for months now, citing late-night work calls and early mornings as his excuses. I didn't argue, it was easier that way. I thought about the life I had imagined when we first moved here. It was supposed to be a place filled with laughter, love, and warmth. Instead, it had become a place where silence reigned, and I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. My mind wandered to Ethan again. His presence in the house was the only thing that felt real anymore. His laughter, his concern, his touch on my shoulder when I seemed lost in thought, it grounded me. But tonight, as I lay in the half-light of my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that even this connection was becoming something more complicated than it should be. I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps, barely audible but enough to pull me from the light sleep I'd drifted into. My eyes fluttered open, and in the faint glow from the hallway, I saw him, Ethan, standing at the threshold of my room. "Mom!" His voice was a whisper, hesitant, almost afraid to break the silence. I sat up, the sheet pooling around my waist. "Ethan, is everything okay?" I asked, my voice still thick with sleep. He hesitated, his hand gripping the doorframe as though it were the only thing keeping him grounded. I just wanted to check on you," he said finally, his eyes searching mine. Something in his tone, in the way he stood there, felt different. Vulnerable. Intimate. I nodded, unsure of what to say, as an unfamiliar tension hung between us. "Come here," I found myself saying, my voice softer than I intended. He stepped into the room, his movements careful, deliberate. As he sat on the edge of my bed, the air seemed to shift. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face, and I froze. It was a simple gesture, innocent on the surface, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't explain. "Good night, Mom," he said finally, standing up and retreating to his room. I lay back down, my heart pounding, and wondered if I had imagined the spark in his eyes, or if it had always been there, waiting for a moment like this. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting a golden glow on the small breakfast table. I sat across from Ethan, sipping my coffee, my gaze fixed on the steam rising from the cup. He was unusually quiet, poking at his scrambled eggs without enthusiasm. "Did you sleep well?" I asked, breaking the silence. My voice sounded strained, even to me. "Yeah," he replied, his eyes avoiding mine. "You?" "Fine," I said quickly, forcing a smile. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, the memory of last night hovering like a shadow neither of us dared to acknowledge. I noticed how his hand trembled slightly as he lifted his glass of juice, a detail that made my heart ache in ways I didn't understand. "I'll be out most of the day," Ethan said abruptly, pushing his plate aside. "Got some errands to run." I nodded, grateful for the excuse to retreat into solitude. "All right, be safe." As he left the kitchen, I sat there, staring at his empty chair. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with questions I wasn't ready to face. After Ethan left, I wandered into the living room, sinking into the worn couch. Memories began to flood my mind, unbidden and relentless. Charles and I had been happy once, or at least I thought we were. I remembered our early days, full of laughter and stolen moments of passion. But over time, his work consumed him, leaving me feeling like an afterthought. Dinners grew silent, gestures of affection became rare, and eventually, even our bedroom turned into separate worlds. In contrast, Ethan's presence had become a balm for my wounded heart. He noticed the little things, when I was upset, when I needed help, or when a kind word could brighten my day. His attention filled the void Charles had left, but it also complicated everything. I thought of the times Ethan had sat beside me on the couch, his hand brushing mine as he passed me the remote, or the way his eyes lingered just a second longer than they should when he complimented me. These moments had seemed harmless, even sweet, but now they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Was this just the deep bond between a mother and son? Or was it something else entirely? The question gnawed at me, leaving me both ashamed and confused. Later that evening, Ethan knocked softly on my bedroom door. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready for whatever he wanted to say. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and uncertain. I nodded and stepped aside, letting him in. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been thinking about last night," he began, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," I said quickly, sitting beside him. "I was just surprised, that's all." He looked up then, his gaze meeting mine. I worry about you, Mom. You seem so alone." His words hit me like a punch to the chest. "I'm fine," I said, though we both knew it wasn't true. "No, you're not," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Dad doesn't see you, and it's not fair. You deserve better." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I turned away, embarrassed by my vulnerability. "Ethan, it's complicated. I just want you to be happy," he said, reaching out to touch my hand. His fingers were warm, steady, and the gesture felt far more intimate than it should have. I looked at him, my heart pounding. "You've always been there for me," I whispered. "But this isn't your responsibility." The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as we sat there, neither of us knowing how to untangle the emotions binding us together. It happened in an instant, a moment so brief yet so profound that it left both of us reeling. As Ethan stood to leave, his hand brushed against my face, A tender gesture meant to comfort. But the way his thumb lingered against my cheek, the intensity in his eyes, it was too much. "Ethan," I began, but the words caught in my throat. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to." Before he could finish, I pulled away, standing abruptly and putting distance between us. My heart raced, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and guilt. "This isn't right," I said, more to myself than to him. "We can't." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. I don't know what's happening anymore." The pain in his eyes mirrored my own, and for a moment I wanted to reach out, to reassure him, to make everything better. But I couldn't. "Go to bed," I said finally, my voice trembling. "We'll talk tomorrow." He hesitated, then nodded, leaving the room without another word. As the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. Whatever line had been crossed tonight, there was no going back. The days following that night were heavy, weighed down by an unspoken tension that filled every corner of the house. I retreated into myself, spending long hours in my room, pretending to read or watch television while my mind replayed the moment over and over. The guilt was suffocating, twisting in my chest like a knot that refused to loosen. Charles, as usual, barely noticed my withdrawal. He asked once, in passing, if I was feeling all right. I mumbled something about being tired, and he accepted it without pressing further. His indifference stung more than I expected, a painful reminder of how far apart we had drifted. Ethan, on the other hand, couldn't hide his inner turmoil. He avoided my gaze at breakfast, kept his responses short when we spoke, and spent most of his time outside the house. When he was home, I could feel the weight of his unspoken shame in every glance, every hesitant movement. One evening, I overheard him speaking on the phone in his room. His voice was low, almost broken as he said, "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what to do." My heart ached for him, but I knew I couldn't comfort him, not this time. We had crossed a line, and the only way forward was to confront it head-on. One sleepless night, as the moonlight bathed my room in its silvery glow, I made a decision. I couldn't let this fester, couldn't allow the bond between Ethan and me to unravel into something neither of us could recover from. Sitting at my desk, I began to write. The words came slowly at first, hesitant and uncertain, but soon they poured out, raw and unfiltered. "Ethan, I don't know where to begin, but I need to say this. What happened the other night, what we both felt, was not your fault. It was a moment born out of loneliness and pain, not malice or intent. You have always been my strength, my light, and I am so grateful for you. But we can't let this define us. We can't let it overshadow the love we share as mother and son. It's a bond that should be pure, unshakable, and I refuse to let anything tarnish it. I take responsibility for my part in this. I let my loneliness blind me, and I leaned on you in ways I shouldn't have. That ends now. You deserve your own life, free from the weight of my struggles. I love you, Ethan, always, and I promise to do better, for you, for me, for our family. Mum." I folded the letter carefully and placed it on his desk, knowing he would find it when he returned. My heart was heavy, but for the first time in days I felt a glimmer of hope. In the weeks that followed, I made a conscious effort to rebuild what had been broken, not just with Ethan but with Charles as well. It wasn't easy. The distance between us had grown over the years, a chasm that seemed insurmountable at times. But I owed it to myself, to my family, to try. I approached Charles one evening after dinner, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. He looked surprised but nodded, setting his laptop aside. We sat in the living room, the space between us feeling both vast and intimate. I spoke honestly about my feelings, about the loneliness that had consumed me and the distance that had grown between us. To my surprise, he listened. For the first time in years, he truly listened. I had no idea, he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. I've been so caught up in work, I didn't see what it was doing to us. We began to rebuild slowly but surely. We went on date nights, rediscovering the parts of each other we had forgotten. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Ethan, too, found his own path. He took up a part-time job, started spending more time with friends, and gradually reclaimed his independence. Our interactions became less strained, and though we never spoke about the letter, I knew he had read it. There was a lightness in his demeanor, a quiet understanding that we were moving forward. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I let myself reflect on the events that had shaken my world. The pain, the guilt, the confusion, it was all still there, lingering like a shadow. But so was the clarity, the determination to grow and heal. Life is messy, emotions are complex, and people are imperfect. But in the end, it's how we face those imperfections that define us. I wasn't proud of what had happened, but I was proud of the steps I had taken to move forward. With love, with clarity, and with hope.